Welcome to the Design Thinker podcast, where we explore the theory and practice of design.
Hosted by me, Dani, and
me, Peter.
This week on the Design Thinker podcast, Peter and I chat with our very first guest, Jason Osburn. Jason is a design thinker with over 20 years of experience working with both startups and Fortune 100 companies. So let's listen in to this conversation where we learn about how Jason got into design work, what his inspirations are, and his approach to helping organizations solve problems through design.
I thought it would be interesting, Jason, if you kind of, told us your story about
Sure.
How did design come into your life?
Yeah, definitely. I was actually writing the about section of my case study site, and it was all about this. It was kind of funny going down memory lane, so it's perfect timing. So yeah, I got into design because I loved comedy and was terrified of getting in front of people. I grew up, I was too scared to do comedy, but I grew up like loving puzzles. I loved comedy. Anything clever communication I just absolutely loved. And so I would study Calvin and Hobbes and Bloom County and Mad Magazine and just absolutely loved them. On Sundays it was Serial and the Sunday Funnies, and I was always done with the Serial first. And it wasn't just the visual communication and how feelings and moments were captured in the drawing. It was also the writing. It was the turn of phrase and everything. And so I used to listen to cassette tapes of comedians just over and over again. And I would listen to the timing and the delivery and the intentional use of silence, right? Pauses and the cadence, all of it. And I was just fascinated by all of it. And so I also love to draw. So I would always try to replicate what I was seeing in the books and in the comics and stuff. And it was always the humor-based comics and the story-based comics, like lighthearted. It wasn't really, I didn't get into more superhero style comics until much later. As a kid, it was always the imagination and the ideas and the creativity and that clever and lighthearted, not deep, troubling stuff, but lighthearted stuff. And so, this was, back in the 80s. And when it was time to go to school, I just decided, I'm too scared to get in front of people to do comedy, right? And then I would think about it too. I'd be like, and can I also do that struggle? Knowing that I'm terrified, could I do that struggle for that long? Would it take me twice as long? Would I ever get to that point if I was that scared? And I thought, well, you know what? I can get my sense of humor out and my love of art out if I got into design. So I became familiar with graphic design and I was like, oh, I can do this. I'm seeing ads, I'm seeing marketing materials, I'm seeing things where humor is being leveraged and along with art. And I think I can do that. And so I went to school in Fort Worth, Texas at TCU, Texas Christian University. I went to school for graphic design. And I started in graphic design and radio TV film, radio TV film minor. But it was just, there was enough work with graphic design. It was like a full-time job outside of school to deliver on the projects that you learn. You spent all day learning, in school, that I dropped the minor and I just focused on graphic design. And that's kind of how I got started. And I just really enjoyed it. It was that creating connection, that communication, and learning about the design principles and what made for good visual communication and all that sort of stuff was an absolute blast. I remember having to hand draw type and just loving it, just getting in that zone, doing that. And then after I graduated I also believe too that, oh, hey, by going through design, I will be forced to present my ideas and pitch or present my ideas at some point. This will give me plenty of years practice of getting comfortable in front of people. And, it worked. I eventually did. And so I was like, yeah, this is the right path. And then after school, when I started doing the work, it was just, I also grew up doing puzzles. I absolutely loved, word puzzles and technical puzzles, not so much jigsaw, but like Rubik's Cube or things like that, but also like the horseshoes that are, stuck together and you have a ring, you got to try to figure out how to get, I just love those. And so design for me and effectively designing, experiences, everything, I realized everything that that I've done over the past 20 years has always been an experience. I knew there was going to be a moment where someone was going to experience what I created. And I always asked, like, how do I want them to feel in that moment? What impression do I want them to walk away with? And of course, there were goals, there were communication goals, there were things you wanted people to either take an action on or whatever. But if I could connect with them in that moment, I realized it'd leave more of an impression that would more likely result in the action that was desired. And so it was just this fun puzzle. And it started with logos, which I hated doing. Like in school, I did not like them at all. I couldn't get it. I understood what a good one looked like. I just couldn't get there until my very first graphic design job at a design studio, because I started in a pre-press department at a printing company in New Hampshire, and learned a ton. Like this is back when we were using cork. I remember cork. I was like, oh, this is how you use this stuff. This is how all these things go. I learned so much more being in a pre-press department about actually using the software.
So cork is a software, not like cork in a wine bottle. It's
It's cork, yeah. Yep. QUARK, which is like InDesign is today's, I guess, version of.
The cork was like the standard for when you sent something to a printing press, you had to take your design and it had to be in a specific layout in cork.
Yeah, it was like from magazine design and publication design, back in the day, and learned a ton at that Alpha Graphics about actually how to use the software that we were first introduced in school.
Yeah.
But then at the design studio, got to really leverage the conceptual side of it, right? Starting with a great concept and then just using the tools to execute that concept. And so ended up designing having to do one logo for a full week, nothing. It was like 50 hours for that week, nothing but doing that one logo. And it was by being forced, the obstacle is the way, right? By being forced to do that thing, at the end of it, I was like, oh, I got it. I understood it. It all clicked. And then I fell in love with doing logos. And so logos became the puzzle. How do you effectively capture the essence of a company and what they do and communicate all the things that you need to communicate in a really, really good logo? And then the puzzle became, well, now that we have the logo, the client's not using it appropriately. So now we got to help them with like a brand guidelines, right? Like a visual identity and how do you use it and all the considerations, right? This is where I started to realize the idea of consideration stacking. The more complex the problem, you just got to stack more considerations on. But as a lover of puzzles, like this was fun, like awesome. Give me more considerations, because if we nail it, that becomes the beautiful, elegant solution is nailing those experiences. And so it went from logos and visual identities to marketing materials and communication like that, where I would do illustration and get a bit into the copywriting, like headlines, like was this piece capturing the essence of what it needed to communicate as concisely as possible, with the visuals and the writing working together. And then it got into animation and flash and motion design. And I did some environmental design in there, some wayfinding systems. And all of it was puzzles, right? Used to design the signage in the studio during the week, and on the weekends I'd work part-time with the guy I'd be up in a cherry picker installing them on the externals, outside of buildings or inside, buildings and stuff, and all this, just learning what it means to go do that. And so, yeah, and then from there I got into interaction design. So after the signage or environmental wayfinding systems, then it was flash and did a lot of motion and animation, and it's you learn what you needed to create the vision of the experience that you want to create, or the thing you want to create. So I get into GarageBand and produce music to capture the essence of whatever it is. Like you can see this thing, all the little pieces, and almost experience it before it exists. So then you back out of that and go, how do I make this thing that I see in my head? And so it's just always learning and stacking skills, and then got into interaction design. I was doing web apps way early on, getting in way over my head with tech, and learning how to bridge the gap between engineers, designers, and the client, right? The customer. And back then, engineers and designers didn't really want to work well together. I had done a bit of coding, and so I understood a bit of that part. I could commiserate with engineers and some of the pain points they were having with designers. I could also commiserate with designers and the pain points they were having with engineers. So I would just bridge the gap and get in over my head, had clients that were, not happy with me, and I would do whatever I could to make it right for the team, for the customer. And you just you just keep powering through and learning. And eventually those web apps turned into mobile apps. And then that turned into working with digital startups. And it just kind of grew, like the puzzle just keeps getting, more and more complex, but also more fun with that. And so, yeah, I got into it because I was too terrified to go do stand-up comedy. I just try to get the humor in my art, or in these moments whenever I can. So
you could have been a comedian at this point.
Believe me, I stare off into the distance being like, man, what if I had just stepped up and
you could have your own Netflix special right now.
Exactly. Yep.
Sorry, go ahead, Pete.
I was going to say, it might not pay quite as well as a Netflix special, but this is where it's at.
Right. I hear you.
We don't plan to have any comedians on this podcast, so
but comedy and humor is definitely very welcome. So
yes.
Yeah. I had a question. Sorry, go on. I was in there first. We play a game, Jason, of trying to get in there with questions, usually to each other. And Dani has a trick where I ask her a question, and instead of answering it, she flips it around and asks me a question instead.
Nice.
And so, feel free to, this is like a three-way conversation. So feel free to do the same thing to Dani or to me. But I'm curious, you mentioned something that really grabbed, everything was really fascinating to hear your story and your path. Something that jumped out, there was this concept of considerations and consideration stacking. I don't know.
Yeah.
Could you delve into that a little bit more? Give us an example or two.
Yeah. So just over the years in designing these, as the experiences got more complex, like the end experiences, right? As the needs got more complex, this really, I think, started taking shape for me as we got more and more into like the web apps and using tech to solve business problems, right? Like I love working with small businesses and companies who are trying to solve a problem and understanding the value of how the tech could do that. It's like really building digital product, right? Like what you realize is there's a lot of stakeholders. You have to go understand those stakeholders. And the thing about the stakeholders, they all have considerations that they're making as people. And so it's when you start to understand those considerations, like early on, I understood the considerations of engineers, the considerations they were making, and I understood the considerations designers were making. I would work closely with the customers to understand their needs and considerations that they were making. They had a need, but you have to ask why. And so those are their considerations. And so you just start stacking those. And these are all the ones that need to be made. And you just check the box. Did we do this? Did we do this? Did we catch all these things? And so, yeah, I guess, I'm a big fan of empathy. I think empathy is massively valuable, but I also think being considerate is just as equally valuable. I think that great designs, good design is I think really considerate. And it's just, when we experience things that have been highly considered, somebody's just taken the time to think through the things, or they've iterated multiple times on it because they went and did a thing, and then they learned something new and they came back and they improved it based on that learning. And so I started calling it consideration stacking. Like, what are all the considerations that need to be made? And the best way to figure out that is to talk to the people that you're making with and that you're making for, and bring them in the fold, like have that communication, happening regularly. And, it's the think, make, test and iterate, but keep those considerations in mind and just keep stacking on them. And before you know it, you have this just amazingly elegant solution that is really checking all the boxes and delivering value in many ways.
What I find really interesting about what you're saying is, there's this misconception that design is this free for all, lofty thinking, pie in the sky kind of thing. But really, design work also requires kind of, I call them constraints or requirements, right? Like you have to understand the constraints you're working within, like, what's the budget, what's the time, what's the, who needs what. Like a good solution takes a lot of thinking and getting your head around the constraints that you have to work within. And that's really when good design comes about, right? Like when a design can can work within all the constraints and still be something that's functional and beautiful. And that's the hard, meaty work of design.
Yep, I agree completely. And you're right. Like I just kind of swapped out constraints with consideration. But that's it. It's what are the things that we need to consider when creating this solution. And then you take a first step, right? Over time, when you do this more and more, you learn how to quickly sift through those things, and prioritize those considerations and understand and determine which ones, based on, like, again, another consideration, budget, like you mentioned, right? Budget and time. Well, we've got a dozen considerations. 3 of these aren't necessarily that important right now, but we know they might be. And so it's not just listing them all and recognizing them all. It's also being able to prioritize and quickly make decisions about, yes, now, maybe later, let's go build this thing, learn from it. And then some of these things that we've held off on that we believe aren't as important to serve the people in a way that supports the business, right? We might find out that, that they are more valuable to include now. But let's start with this. Let's mitigate our risk by starting with this, right? And then go try it and then quickly learn. It's that iterative style of, just make, test, and then continue to iterate on it. But yeah, and after doing that and making those mistakes way early on, where you got an angry client calling you on Thanksgiving, right? Like we say, hey, where's my stuff? You start to realize, okay, the next time around, we got to do a better job. Like I'm saying this to myself, right? Osburn, you got to do a better job considering these things, right? Like, what did you miss? Let's make a list of these things. And next time around that you do this, make sure these are considered up front. And then you learn the value of expectation management up front. You understand the questions to ask up front to try to get as much ahead of it as possible, so you can move faster, deliver value faster by iterating faster, making decisions faster. And but it's all design. Like you said, Dani, it's to me, design is intentionally arranging things for a desired result, right? So I start intentionally arranging the questions up front for the desired result of, you just design everything, right? Like that's a hashtag that goes through my hashtag design everything, right? Like just act with intention and don't just learn from what you're doing and make it better next time. And just do that about everything. And it just makes things fun for me, right? It's not just arbitrarily floating around, but.
And I think that's the magic of when you learn how to design, right? Because a lot of so like the email that I sent you to start, kind of say, hey, you're a guest here, right? Pete looked at it and he's like, oh, this is so, like it's this and it's that. And I'm like, and in my head, I'm like, well, yeah, I designed it that way.
Right.
Thanks for recognizing that, Pete. But I think when you have those basic capabilities instilled in you, everything you view it as a design problem.
Yeah. Yeah, you view it as something like, oh, something just happened. What were the things that were arranged that made that thing happen? What were the considerations that were made or not made? And then you just start to break it down, and it becomes like things become easier to deal with a lot of times. And I've found that it's easier to deal with them with less emotion. Emotions don't trip you up as much. I mean, I'm still human, right? I still get emotional about things, but with the mindset, it's easy to go, oh, let's break this down into the bits, right? Like, and understand, causing this or how we got here. And then, like, to me, everything's a Lego. It's a building block, right? So it's like, oh, here are the bits, here are the blocks. And then, okay, how do we want to rearrange these, right? For a different result, or just choose to ignore all the blocks. I think I'll be like, you know what? I'm not going to let this, that's intentional too, right? Like, I'm going to design this moment to be not my problem. Adults and deal with their thing. I'm not going to get, I'm intentionally arrange my energy and mindset, right? So.
Yeah, I'm loving this. Jason and anyone else who's listened to a couple of episodes know that especially more recently we're kind of honing in on definitions and words and language, which yes. I'm sure you'll appreciate. But I loved your definition of design there, and I think I've got it. I'm going to ask you to confirm if I have, so we can capture it and maybe turn it into a regular guest question. So your definition of design is I think it's intentionally arranging things to arrive at a desired result.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I just intentionally arranging things for a desired result. And
Yeah.
I've heard definitions that say like a positive end result. And
Mhm.
I've thought about that a lot. And I think that's perspective. I know, we see things that are designed for a negative end result. It's positive to the person designing, but maybe not the person, I always think like if I'm designing a trap to trap a rabbit, not great for the rabbit, but great for me if I'm starving, right? So
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think good or bad is subjective, but I just at the end of the day, it's just being intentionally arranging things for a desired result, whatever that may be.
So yeah, I love your that little rabbit hole. Actually, you just started us down it, and I'll chase you down it just briefly. We can stop any time, but because when you were then laterally talking about logic and Lego blocks, which I love playing with Lego and I still do, and then also emotion. I wonder, designing is intentionally and logically arranging things, or maybe intentionally arranging things in a logical way to arrive at a desired emotional result.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, maybe something, and I love experimentation, right? Like, I think if you see everything as an experiment, it takes the pressure off. And like you show up with the excitement of like a kid with a chemistry set, right? It's like, let's see what happens. And so maybe some of it is, maybe in your head it's logical, but to others it may not be. And maybe it's just arbitrary. But with the idea of experimenting, maybe it's not logical, but that's the point, which would maybe then you're intentionally logically not doing. I don't know. That's interesting. Yes, I'll say yes. Yes, and
yes, and well,
yes.
And even as I was kind of in itself, that's a bit of a thought experiment, which we like playing with here as well. Is maybe my real question is: are we always designing for emotion?
I think I think connection, and I think emotion is a big part of that. And so I think we're always designing for some sort of connection. And I think people do this already. I think it's whether you're aware that you do it or not. I use the example of a surprise birthday party, right? Like you're designing for a moment, really, right? The moment to say surprise. There's a lot of energy and effort that goes into coordinating people hiding behind couches and lamps that are way too small to hide behind, right? So all this sort of things just to jump out and say surprise at a moment, just to, scare somebody into being happy about getting a year older, right? So there's a lot of effort that goes into those to make that moment perfect. And to me, it's an example of intentionally arranging things. But although the person do it, they're designing a moment, but they may not realize that. So another example I like to use is when you go on an interview, right? Like you arrange your wardrobe. If you show up early, you're arranging your time, right? Like you arrange a lot of things for the desired result of leaving a good impression, which you hope then leads to, landing the job that you're interviewing for. And so we are already arranging things for desired results. We just don't call that design. Everybody has a capability, and Dani, you and I have talked about this a lot. Like everybody has a capability to design things, and they're already intentionally arranging things for design. We just don't call it design. We associate design with like the pretty and the pixel and the drawing and the visuals and all that, but it really is much more of the problem solving side and intentionally acting with intention and just being aware that that's the case. And
I think one thing that you're raising awareness to here that I want to call out is that design is also not about a tangible thing. Like if you think about the birthday party, it is very much an exercise in design, but you're designing for an experience. It's intangible.
Exactly.
We know it when we feel it, but it's a design, it's an act of design, right? And I think oftentimes when we think of design, we think object, but it doesn't, we can design something that's not an object.
So for 10 years, when I was doing all that, like, bridging the gap between designers and engineers and customers and everything, like I was doing user experiences and I did not realize that was the case, right? I was just heads down doing all this, trying to stay above water and not get my clients and deliver value, to the team that I was collaborating with and to the clients, like trying to figure all this out. And then I joined a company that was I joined a company as a first user experience strategist, and I had tons of imposter syndrome going, wow, I've been doing this on my own for so long. I'm like, this is an established company. Even though they were small, I was like, they got to be doing this for a while. I joined. I didn't need to have the imposter syndrome I had. I had a lot of value by going and figuring it out on my own. Eventually, I started designing communication to keep the people that I was working with, clients, team, just aligned and on the same page of what we were designing and building for. And so it was during that time at that company that I realized, holy cow, like the term user experience design, right? Like I never really liked the term user, right? Like it just always reminds me of an addict or something, right? Like, and look, with social media and mobile devices these days, maybe that's appropriate, but like experience always resonated with me. And I do believe everything is an experience, right? And storytelling and design, like my passion sits at the intersection of design, storytelling, technology, and entrepreneurship. And I cannot help, like there's always a story that someone's going to tell, right? So we are always having experiences. We can be intentional about the experiences we create, because the reality is there's going to be a story that someone's going to tell, either because they want to, right? Or because they're asked to, right? They have to. And we have a say on whether that's a good story that gets told or that's a bad story that gets told, right? And if we're talking about products or, marketing, advertising, whatever it is, like it's ultimately a brand experience, right? Even if you talk about personal branding, right? If you're having an individual experience with somebody else and you're paying attention to that and you're mindful of it, that's a personal brand experience, right? So I do think everything just settles down into experiences, like you were saying, Dani, and design doesn't have to result in a tangible thing, but it does result in an experience. And there's a quote that I absolutely love because I think she nailed it. I think it's 100% the truth. It's the Maya Angelou quote that people will forget what you said, they will forget what you did, but they will never forget how you made them feel. And I think that's true about brands, products that we use, the restaurants we go to, the people we interact with, and because it's that experience, and that experience results in a feeling, and you walk away feeling one way or another. And you have a story to tell about that, right? If the restaurant did an amazing job creating an experience, you're going to tell everybody you know. If the product did that, if the brand did that, you're going to tell everybody you know, right? That's that coveted word of mouth. And same thing with the people you meet, right? You're going to talk about the experience you had with those individuals, right? And so, yeah, like design doesn't have to always end in a tangible thing, but it's gonna end in a moment. It's going to result in a moment. And then if we're, intentional and aware and just mindful, really.
So I think we've answered, Pete, your question around, so you kind of added to Jason's definition with logically arranging, and then the impact of that is emotions. I think we've kind of talked that design, there is a strong connection between design evoking emotion. So I think we are designing for some sort of emotional reaction.
Yeah. And connection, right? Like, create connection that inspires action, right?
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about the logic. And I think this is another, if we play around with words or word association, oftentimes design and creativity sit on the opposite end of logic. That's not my view. That's just, conventionally, that's how it's viewed. So is there a logic in design?
I think there can be. I think if you're iterating and you learn things and you take those learnings and you're arranging things intentionally based on your learnings, then perhaps that seems logical based on what's learned. So I think there certainly can be. Logic can certainly be a part of that.
Pete's in deep thought over there.
I see that.
Well, here's what was going on inside my brain whilst listening. Maybe that's a lie I'm telling myself. I was kind of listening to what you were saying, Jason, but Dani's question went off in, well, I'm not a logician. I've never studied logic, but, logic is, or one kind of logic is, like a programming logic, if this, then that, or, a hypothesis that we might use when we're designing is we believe that by doing X, we will achieve Y. That's kind of that's logical. But then there is, we might have to have our Google moment here, Dani, for this episode. There's a really fantastic book. Sorry, go on, Jason.
I was gonna say, I just Googled, you mean the definition of logic?
Yes.
Well, there's
Yeah.
there's a specific kind of logic that does come into play in design, according to Roger Martin. That is, so I was just going to say, it's a really amazing book for designers who are working in or with businesses, especially large businesses, and the book's called The Design of Business by Roger Martin. Look it up. This episode will have show notes because I'm going to write them, so I'll put it in the show notes. But in that book, he talks about three kinds of logic, and this is where my brain goes a bit fuzzy. There's, I think, deductive logic, abductive logic, and then is it
Inductive?
Inductive, yeah. And design is the one in the middle, whichever one that is. I told you I wasn't a logician. Yeah, so it's the combination of the two other kinds that design is involved in. If anyone's managing to Google that while I'm talking, then to tell us more. Who wants to be Google for the episode?
I can actually speak to this.
Oh,
Nice.
Okay.
So Roger Martin talks about these three types of thinking, right? So there's inductive reasoning, deductive reasoning, and abductive reasoning. And abductive is the one that sits in the middle. And what he talks about is design is the catalyst that can work across all three of these types of thinking. So as a designer, we can think very abstractively. We can imagine things, generate ideas. But we also have the ability to then experiment and kind of reduce ideas from a bunch of ideas down to what is feasible. So yeah, that was his point. So he has a very specific definition of logic, and I think that aligns much more with how our brains actually work and the different types of thinking that our brains can do. I think conventionally or in everyday language, when we say logic, I think we mean something very differently.
Okay. What did you mean when you asked the question about logic being in design?
I was using the more conventional use of the word, which is, according to Google, one definition is reasoning conducted or assessed according to a strict principles of validity.
I thought the second definition was interesting.
Do you want to say what it is?
Yeah, it was a system or set of principles underlying the arrangement of elements. But then it applies it specifically within a computer or electronic device. But we just talked about, a system, like the arrangement of elements, right? So it's curious that it is specific to a computer or electronic device, but like systems, right? Like system design and things like that. Like there's a lot of, interesting stuff in system design. At the end of the day, like doing all this design stuff, you start to break things down. You start to realize everything's a system. So once I get to understand the system, then I get to understand the building blocks, and we can rearrange those building blocks, right? And this is where like innovation stuff comes from, right? Oh, understand what exists already, rearrange them in unique ways that weren't, the way they weren't arranged before, and now we're getting much more value than we did before. So I just thought it was interesting that it specifically assigned that to within a computer or electronic device, but I wonder if it's possible these days to move out of that. Yeah, to broaden that. Yeah.
I think the other reason that I struggle with the word logic being in there is that, in like behavioral economics would tell us that the human brain isn't very logical. We love to believe we're very logical, rational people, but there's plenty of research that shows that we often make very irrational, illogical decisions. So I think that's also why I'm struggling a little bit with the word logic here. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I am now too, and I think Did I hear or read somewhere the idea of that is just so we feel better? We just create these things that we think are logical. It all comes back down to the fields, right? Like it's just you create these things you think are logical just so you feel better about whatever decisions that you're making at the end of the day, right? So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't necessarily have to be logical, or what we think is logical really isn't. So why even worry about it? Let's just start arranging things and see what happens, and then until we get the desired results, right? And you know,
it is true that we like our brains crave predictability, right? So when we've made a decision, or we're about to make a decision, or we're not sure of it, we basically are grasping for anything that can justify why the decision we've made. So yeah, we play a lot of games with our own heads about trying to use logic to ground ourselves in.
Yeah, I like that. We think we're being logical, but maybe we're not being nearly as logical as we think. Yeah.
What are your thoughts, Pete?
Well, my thought was, I was wondering, in terms of a thought experiment, it's a bit like my problems thought experiment. What if humans didn't exist? Would there be logic in the world? Likewise, if humans didn't exist, or humans were frozen just for 20 minutes in the world, then there would be no such thing as a problem from my perspective, because problems are just a human construct, or a human perspective, and maybe it's the same as logic. But I do really, I'm buying into what Jason was saying. For me, it's almost one of the essences of design, which is, let's get so far with our thinking, but eventually we need to start doing and putting something out into the world and seeing if our arrangement, logical or not, of things results in the desired intended outcome. It's pretty simple. And I bet, Jason, maybe some of your perspective has been finely honed through working with engineers, for example, who are trained to be extremely logical, even if that's their kind of practice is logic. And for me, one of the appeals of design is this balance between the two, let's say, worlds of, say, engineering, logical, and art on the other end, which can be completely illogical or creative. Yeah,
I think that's one of the things I love most about design is I found that the more open I can stay, the better the stuff just ends up working out, right? Because I like how engineers think. I like learning how they think and how they make connections. And it's just always about the connections, right? Arranging things, right? How are you connecting those ideas in your head to arrive where you arrive? And so I think the more open that you can stay, the more likely you're to hit on truly valuable solutions versus holding crazy tight onto something that you think is the way or should be the way, and not leaving room for possibility, right? And so like you were saying, Peter, if we just go and just, you still got to measure, you still got to, watch and measure, but what fun is a chemistry set if you're like, you get all these rules and stuff, right? You just mix stuff together and see what happens, right? That's not fun. Like, just keep making and see what happens, but you got to measure, you want to measure, and you're working towards a goal, right? So you want to make sure that you're doing that, but that constant learning, like real learning, you got to stay open. Everything you thought was true today may not be true tomorrow. That's happened since humans were a thing, right? Like, if we know that that's happened over and over and over again, why do we try to keep fighting that and not just stay completely open and going, I'm not saying don't believe, believe in, if you don't believe in anything, you fall. If you don't believe in something, you fall for anything. Like, I'm not saying don't have beliefs, but holding so tightly to those that there's no room for growth of yourself, of your business, right? Like, whatever it is, then it's just, I don't know, that seems logically detrimental.
But we did do that, don't we? Like, as a collective, I'm speaking here, that it's almost like we would rather stick to the thing that we're familiar with, even though we know it's not working and it's probably painful, then kind of venture beyond to find something that we're not familiar with that might be less painful.
That's why I think design can help make it less painful, right? Like, that's why I embrace the suck, right? Like, get comfortable with the uncomfortable. But if you have a tool like design, like an innate tool we all have, it is just flipping a switch and seeing, it's a change of perspective. Like, that's where design can be that thing where it's like, oh, this is a chemistry set. These are all experiments. Let's go learn, not pass, fail. If you fail, that's it. You're awful. You're done. It is a constant, just like a business. I think if humans stop growing, they die, right? Like, you got to keep growing, and that means keep challenging your thoughts and your mind and the things that you're exposed to, and ask questions, question everything, right? And just keep doing that, and you know, in a pursuit of learning, right? Knowledge, and you know, what happens if I arrange these things? Like, oh, we have this goal. Let's try a bunch of things until we achieve that, and then let's go get the next thing. Or yeah, I think design is definitely a tool that can help make him getting comfortable with the uncomfortable much more comfortable.
I totally agree with that. And I think it's also a tool that can make the uncomfortable a bit fun. Like,
yeah,
there
100%.
is a joy to designing things, right?
Yeah, 100%, right? Like, we are all creative. We have the capability, right, to be creative. And I think design, I think good design is inclusive. That means, like, you got to bring, like, that's one of the things I learned. The faster I can bring other people immediately in, as long as I got to get really good at defining what the problem is and to be able to communicate it really, really effectively. The sooner I can get other people involved that I know are stakeholders that will have an impact, a direct impact on what the end result is going to be. We're all working together now. That's fun. Like, creating and making together is fun. It's, you know, now you're in a pile with your buds and you know, with your friends, and you got all the Legos on the floor, and everybody just like picking stuff up and making stuff, right? Like, the world's a bunch of Legos, a bunch of building blocks, and you get your friends and, you know, colleagues together, and you just say, hey, here's the problem we're trying to solve. Let's go solve it together. I mean, it happens naturally. Look, we tell our friends the problems that we have, and they immediately start trying to solve it for us, right? Like, we've been in a relationship whose partner has said, look, I just need you to listen. I don't need you to solve, right? Like, we are naturally problem solvers and creative. And it should be fun, no matter the size of the problem. Like, it's, you know, because what the hell's the point in being here and doing this stuff if it's not going to be enjoyable, right? Well, life's too short for that. So
we've had some great chats here around, you know, kind of just getting to know your work and some good banter around some views on design. So what I'm curious about is, you know, as a design practitioner, what's the biggest lesson you've learned so far?
There have been a lot of lessons. I don't know if there's one big one. One that I've used a lot is the idea of being mindful of the moments we create for others. And it's really just, it's a way to just really say, look, use design every day, right? Like, being mindful means being intentional. We're everything's an experience. We're creating moments all the time. If you can learn, and then to me, it's just no way of saying be considerate, right? Like, but being mindful of the moments we create for others, I've found helpful, especially in moments where I'm frustrated and it has to do with, you know, working with others or making for others or whatever. I mentioned earlier the inclusion, like, get people in, like, bring people in, solve problems together collaboratively, right? Like, find out those considerations you need to stack to truly understand the scenario, because who wants to redo the work, right? Like, who wants to waste a bunch of time and money, right? Like, let's define the problem really well and get people, the stakeholders involved as quickly as possible, and start asking questions and learning from each other, and then take all those building blocks and together build, you know, solutions.
I also think the importance of, you know, to use your language, the importance of understanding all the considerations up front is also, it helps solidify that the problem you think needs to be solved is the actual problem to be solved. Because I think a lot of times we tend to jump on to solving a problem, but we haven't actually had the conversation about, wait, is this just a symptom? or is it actually a problem?
Yeah. Oh, real problems versus perceived problems too, right? Like, yeah. No,
I was just in a conversation
right.
the other day where, I jumped onto this meeting and they're like 20 minutes into a conversation about designing an app. And I could not for the life of me figure out, why are we developing an app? And nobody could articulate it. And so then we had to take a step back and go, wait, what are we solving for here? And it turned out it's not even an app that we needed. Somebody just threw that out as an idea and everybody latched onto it. And,
no, that's what we do. We love solutions. Yeah.
But those situations happen on a daily basis. I think that's where taking the time to understand the considerations up front is really important.
I wonder if everybody should learn how to create a pitch deck for like investors, like an investor, like, you got to start a pitch deck. You're going to go raise money because you have to start with a problem and why it's a problem and how you solve it, right? Like you always have to start with that problem. Like maybe that's just a good skill set for anybody who is, designing and making and creating to learn how to do just the first few slides of a pitch deck.
Or even like a problem canvas, right? Like where you've got the one pager and you've got the boxes and it talks about, you've got to define what it is that you're trying to do, who it impacts, and kind of size it up that way. Like even just that is a basic life skill.
Yeah. I think we'd get to valuable solutions much faster, versus, because it is fun coming up with ideas and then going and making and building, right? But then it gets real painful real fast when you run out of money or, it didn't, it added more problems because you didn't consider the things, right? Like there were things that you were been easily simple questions to ask that you didn't consider, right? So you're never going to get it 100% right, but just getting better at considering upfront and asking good questions to the right people. And they're often very, very simple questions. They're not complex questions, right? I do believe the quality of an end result is directly related to the quality of the questions asked up front. So get good at asking good, simple questions up front, and you'll save yourself a lot of heartache later on down the line.
Do you have any tips and tricks for people around how to ask good questions?
I found starting with who and why, like that just always seems to, if you already know the who, then you start with the why. Sometimes it's, somebody says they need a thing, well, who needs it? Why do they need it, right? I've just always found real value in that. Like I've always felt, sometimes in workshops and stuff, where I'm not following certain rules of the various design workshops or whatever. I just have always found a lot of success in starting who and why. My mind works in lists. And that always resulted in what's, right? Like what the expectations are, what we have to work with, right? Like, and then you just, again, it's all the little bricks. And then you start to make those connections and realize, oh, okay, cool. But starting with who and why starts to, it's a thread you pull and it just starts leading you to, where you need to be. I wouldn't overcomplicate it and try to avoid making assumptions. It's hard, but try to avoid making assumptions and try to recognize, when you are, and then just stay calm, right? Like just chill. And if you could just start with the who and the why, and then, I like the 5 whys. So keep asking why, and then,
I like your and just chill.
Hard to get look, if you're a designer, you're thinking and you're making connections, and to get the brain to chill for a bit and be like, yeah, so who needs this? Why do they need it? It's like there's something about those leaders that are good at staying calm and asking really simple questions and, listening more than solutioning. And also, I think as a design leader too, or just leaders in general, like understanding the value of just trusting the people that you've surrounded yourself with, or the talented people that are around you. And as a leader, defining the problems really well. And then just like as humans, we love solutioning. So define that problem really well, explain why it's a problem and some potential, success measures or whatever, right? And then put that out there. And then you don't have to have the right answer as a leader. You gotta know how to recognize, right? You gotta understand how to get good at considering all the things and know when you hear it, right? But let your team go and connect and do that work. You don't have to do it, yourself. You don't have to be the hero and be the one with the right answer. You just have to be the one who recognizes it, who's willing to make a decision, who's willing to get the hand slap, take the responsibility. But trust your team. But you have to define the problem, not design, but define the problem really, really well. So you maximize your team's ability to have success at solving that problem.
And when you do that, I think then it gets everybody on the team very clear and aligned. And this is what we're trying, like everybody's working on the same goal.
Exactly. because they're excited. Now they're excited. They got buy-in, you got them engaged, they have a voice, right? Inclusive, and you're going to get the best solutions from that. You're going to get considerations from all those individual stakeholders with their expertise who know that if we don't consider this thing that I know we need to consider, we're either not going to hit our date, we're not going to, generate the revenue we need to, we're going to cause a massive cost, down the road that we may not realize. And so lean on your team, trust the smart people that you surround yourself with a well-defined problem to chew on.
Nice. So as we're getting, we could stay on and chat about design forever. But as we are getting to the end of our time, we usually end our, Peter and I like to end our podcast with each of us talking about one thing that we are taking away from today's conversation. So given all that we've talked about, and I can't even remember all the things we've talked about. Where did we start with, Pete? We started with
Jason got into design because he loves comedy, but was too scared to stand up on stage.
Yep.
Which is a lovely starting point.
And then we got to hear about your career. I think you did some great throwbacks to Cork and Flash and cassette tapes. So I guess if you're under 40 and listening to this, you might be completely lost.
Well, even talking about pre-press and things going to be printed. Kids, that there was this thing called paper and
in ink, yes.
Yeah.
I wonder what they do in design school now. Do they? Because I remember, as when I was in design school, we would visit printing presses, and you would get to see how the ink got loaded, and that's how you learned that you need to really make sure that your designs are done properly before it gets sent out to print, because it's a costly process.
That's how I get into tech. I couldn't handle all the mistakes and the.
But I wonder what they did in design school now. So if there's, if someone is in design school now and listening to this, we'd love to hear what field trips you're getting these days.
Yeah, it's a field trip to the printer room where they have really expensive inkjet printers.
Yeah, the good old days. And then we had some great chats around your definition, which I love your definition of design work, and also played around with, what that could mean. Did I forget anything, Pete? Just in terms of a recap?
Oh, let's see what else Jason talked about his kind of sweet spot, his real interest is the intersection of design, storytelling, tech, and entrepreneurship. So we talked about designing for experiences. We talked about different kinds of logic. We delved into Jason's idea of consideration stacking, and then we kind of finished up, I guess, designing. Jason's kind of key lesson is designing is being mindful of the moments that we create for others. And we talked about most really important is defining the problem. If we get the problem defined in the right way, then everything starts to flow on from that.
And that was really good. And I think what stood out for me in that is, framing the problem really well, and then also knowing, asking good questions and thinking about the questions you're going to ask, right? And I like your who and why, because I think that really helps people ground what questions to ask. Okay, so taking all that into consideration, what's one thing you're taking away from today? We'll start with you, Jason, since you're our guest today.
Honestly, I was thrown when the question of the logic and my definition of design was thrown up, and I appreciated it because I had settled on that. And so the idea of staying open and always rethinking even the things that you currently believe, right? Staying open to rethinking that. So I enjoyed being able to explore that a bit and have that thrown in there. So that was fun for me. And I completely agree with you, Peter, when you mentioned the idea of like every problem's a human problem. Whenever I hear human-centered problem solving, I'm like, it's really just, it's problem solving, right? Because, you know, I agree. I believe that, you know, humans are the ones that say that this is a problem. If it's a problem, then someone is saying it's a problem. And so all problems are human problems, right? So there's a human that wants to see it resolved.
I love that. What about you, Pete?
Well, I really appreciate Jason's definition of design. So it's intentionally arranging things to arrive at a desired result. Despite my attempts to expand and play around with it, I think it holds up really well. I like definitions or sentences that you can, you know, parse and delve into each individual word. And for me, I'm gonna use this as my guiding definition for a while and play around with it and see where it takes me. So yeah, thank you, Jason.
Of course, and I would love to hear anything that you come up with if you play around it and push things around. And
yeah,
I'd love to
I will.
hear.
Maybe my other takeaway is I used to love Calvin and Hobbes, and I think when I was too old or old enough to know better, I once dressed up as in I think I might have been like 19 or 20. I dressed up as Stupendous Man.
I love it.
Sooner or later, sorry, I have looked up Calvin and Hobbes Wikipedia. Maybe we could. This could be a theme for design, actually. Calvin and Hobbes, they're playing some game which involves badminton rackets, croquet hoops, and a hobby horse. And Calvin is saying, sooner or later, all our games turn into Calvin ball. Maybe sooner or later, all problems turn into design.
Yeah.
I like that. Every problem is an opportunity to exercise our design muscles.
Nice.
Yes, which should be fun. Yeah.
Yeah. No cheating, Hobbes says.
No.
Dani, how about you? What's your takeaway, or two or three?
So the first one for me is, you know, as you were talking about humor and, you know, your two paths, comedian or designer, I started thinking about, you know, all of the design people that I know have really great sense of humors. So I wonder if so one thing that I kind of want to explore a little bit is like, is there a link between humor and design? Like, you know, like, does having a good sense of humor allow us to be good designers, or, you know, are we good designers, vice versa? So that sparked a lot of curiosity in me around that whole idea of humor. And because I don't think those two things, I don't think the fact that you were on, those were your decision points, is purely accidental.
I think comedians are masters at arranging words and silence and thoughts for the desired result of laughter, right? Like and it's just the brain. It's just the brain. And you know, there's not pencils or software. It's just, you know, it's just the ability to do that. That's just genius.
I wonder if comedians are actually like the OGs of design, experience design.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
So that's kind of that's my takeaway. And the other thing you've got me sparking about, Jason, is this idea of, you know, you mentioned, should everybody have some skill set in designing a pitch deck? And my version of that is like, should everybody have some skills in, like, how do we define a problem?
Yeah.
And, you know, and is there like a little bit of a tool that we can give people so that they are being deliberate about defining the problem? So those are
I think that's a great idea. That's a great idea. I think we'd save so much time by just learning how to do that innately, you know, and get really, really good at doing that up front.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, Jason, for joining us today.
Thank you all. This was awesome. An absolute blast talking with both of you. I really appreciate the invite. And yeah, this was a lot of fun. So thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We appreciate your time.